Imagine a huge door made of light. On the other side, there's everything your soul dreams of: freedom, balance, expression, security, expansion, and you stand before it, key in hand. But instead of turning, you hesitate. Your body freezes, your heart races, and with an almost invisible impulse, you pocket the key and step back. This is the silent experience of thousands of people who are living with less than they could, and not for lack of effort, talent, or merit, but for something deeper. Something that happens in the realm the mind cannot reach, the unconscious. You walk, you work, you seek to align yourself with the divine, and yet everything seems to stall just when it should flow. Money disappears, opportunities evaporate, energy drains. And you once again ask yourself, what's wrong with me? But what if the question is in the wrong place? That's it. There is nothing wrong with you, but yes, a hidden code that still governs your reality. Carl Jung called this shadow, the unrecognized fragments of the soul that end up shaping destiny. And when this shadow forms around money, abundance, and prosperity, it can make receiving a danger, prospering a punishment, and shining a risk. In this video, we go together to this hidden point, the place where your soul may have made an unconscious pact with scarcity and where she can now finally free herself. Breathe. The door is here. And maybe today, you will allow yourself to cross over. Some doors don't have locks, they recognize vibrations, and they only open when the soul emits a yes that comes from within, calm, conscious, courageous. But the truth is that many souls have spent their lives saying no without realizing it. No to merit, no to comfort, no to expansion. Not because they didn't want to, but because at some point in the journey learned that it was too dangerous to receive. You may be among them. Maybe you've felt it before, that strange sabotage that appears when everything starts to work. You align, you visualize, you work hard, but just as abundance begins to approach, some part of your lock, a subtle discomfort, a shiver, a weight on the chest, as if an inner voice said, "It's better to stop here," and you stop. That's where the mystery lies, because rationally you want to prosper, but there is unconscious code that associates prosperity with loneliness, guilt, and punishment, a silent pact with the past, with your family, with some forgotten memory, with some pain. He said, "He who has too much loses what he loves." Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not evil. She is the denied part of us, the one that tries to protect us, even if it means keeping us small. And it is this shadow that may be distorting your relationship with money, abundance, and your own mission. Not because you're wrong, but because there's something inside you that has not yet been seen. This video is an invitation, not to look for another technique, but to look honestly at what is still hidden. The question is not just, what is blocking my prosperity? But yes, what part of my soul is still afraid to thrive? If something has already vibrated in you in these first few minutes, leave a sign in the comments. Your experience may resonate with someone who still feels alone in this process. And if you feel that this kind of conversation strengthens you, reminds you of who you are inside, you can join us. This channel is a safe space for souls reconnecting. It's not about money. It's about energy, about release, about allowing life to flow again with truth. The door is before you, and all she hopes for is a yes that comes from her essence. There's a kind of fear you don't scream about. You inherit it. It doesn't scare you like a monster in the night. It lurks like a mist in your field, hovering over your moments of progress. You don't see it, but you feel it. It doesn't paralyze you violently, but subtly. It manifests itself when everything starts to fall into place. When the flow of the universe seems to align with your intentions, but something inside you recoils. A subtle tension appears, a doubt, a discomfort, and without understanding why, you begin to retreat, to postpone, to put things off, to move away from what seemed to finally be arriving. The name of this is Shadow of Plenty, and Carl Jung, who dedicated his life to understanding the invisible aspects of the human psyche, taught us that everything that remains unconscious within us ends up being experienced as destiny. The fear of thriving is not, most of the time, conscious. It is a learned reflex, a response of the energetic system to something that once caused pain. Often, this pain wasn't even yours. It was your mother's, your father's, your lineage's. But your soul, sensitive and loyal, decided to store that as truth, and it began to vibrate in accordance with the suffering of those who came before. This fear doesn't reveal itself easily. It disguises itself as prudence, modesty, and detachment. It tells you that you don't need much, that the essential is enough, that wanting more is greed. And behind these phrases, there's often a deep belief that having too much is dangerous, that money separates, that prosperity drives away, that brilliance attracts judgment. So for emotional security, you withdraw, you reduce your dreams, you soften your presence, and you begin to live in an energetic zone where almost is the maximum allowed. You almost had, you almost achieved, you almost expanded. But living in almost doesn't nourish the soul, because the soul recognizes incoherence. It knows it was made to expand, to circulate, to express its light truthfully. And when you withdraw to please, to protect yourself, or to fit in, something inside you is silently sickening. This illness isn't physical, it's vibrational, and it manifests itself in blockages, scarcity, self-sabotage, and frustration. The mind doesn't understand, but the energetic field knows. There's a part of you that still believes it's not safe to thrive. The origin of this shadow may lie in childhood, in seemingly harmless phrases. Those who are rich are not happy. So-and-so grew up and became arrogant. Money doesn't bring love. The child who hears this doesn't filter it. They absorb it, and they associate wealth with rejection, growth with abandonment, success with loneliness. The adult mind may want to prosper, but the emotional body still lives in the past, and this disconnect generates noise. You desire something but emit a contrary vibration, and the universe responds to what you vibrate, not what you affirm. That's why so many cycles repeat themselves. You start a project and it goes well, until it falls apart. A good opportunity arises, but something happens and it slips away. You receive an unexpected amount, and soon after, an urgent expense arises. It's no coincidence, it's a pattern, and this pattern only dissolves when you recognize the shadow that sustains it, not to fight it, but to embrace it. The fear of thriving isn't an enemy, it's a guardian. It protects a wound that hasn't yet healed. And like every guardian of the soul, it only lowers its weapons when it senses you're ready to look with love at what hurt. When you stop running from your light, your brilliance, your creative power. When you decide you no longer need to diminish yourself to be loved, nor shrink to be accepted. From that point on, everything changes, because the field begins to reorganize. The energy that was previously used to hide begins to manifest. The shadow, once resistant, becomes an ally, and prosperity, which previously seemed a risk, begins to be perceived as what it always was, a natural extension of your essence. But to get to that place, it takes courage. The courage to say, I will no longer run from my greatness. I choose to integrate my light with maturity, because the soul no longer wants to carry pacts of scarcity. It wants to breathe, it wants to circulate. And she only needs one thing, your consent. Some pains leave no bruises or visible scars, but they live, pulsing like strings, vibrating silently within us. They are ancient wounds, so deep they have become part of our energetic identity. Wounds that were not caused by something we did, but by something we inherited, absorbed, or witnessed. Wounds of the soul. And these wounds, when unacknowledged, create a very specific type of resistance, the unconscious rejection of prosperity. Imagine that at some point in your lineage, there were losses related to money. Someone was betrayed over an inheritance, someone was humiliated for having nothing, someone loved, and because of it, lost everything. The collective soul of the family records this trauma. It stores these unresolved stories as warnings, as energetic markers that say, "Be careful, this is dangerous." And the most sensitive descendant, often you, begins to carry this silent legacy. This memory doesn't reach you in clear words. It comes as discomfort in the face of success, as guilt for wanting more, as self-sabotage that appears illogically. You try to open your arms to abundance, but some part of you closes its eyes. And then, the thing you desire most begins to hurt, as if it doesn't fit inside you, as if it isn't your right. Carl Jung said that everything that does not become conscious returns as destiny. And that's exactly what happens with these soul wounds. They shape your path until you have the courage to see them. They influence your choices, your relationships, your ability to receive, to trust, to expand. You think you're making rational decisions, but you're just following the script of an ancestral pain that has never been reframed. These wounds express themselves in subtle behaviors. You downplay your achievements, avoid being seen, feel uncomfortable demanding more for your work, or attract partners who drain you emotionally. All of this reflects a wound that screams, "It's safer to be small." Because at some point in the past, perhaps in another generation or in another lifetime, being great came at a high price. And if you've been conditioned to associate abundance with loss, abandonment, or injustice, then your vibrational field doesn't allow it to remain. Even if you reach it for a brief period, something pushes it out, because the energetic body can't sustain what the unconscious considers dangerous. This trauma isn't about money, it's about the pain associated with it, about the frozen emotions tied to the act of receiving. And these emotions run deep. Fear of being envied, shame of having more than one's parents, guilt for distancing oneself from the family's collective pain. Prosperity isn't rejected by the mind, but by the heart, which still bleeds from loyalty to the past. Healing these wounds requires more than techniques. It requires presence, looking within with sincerity, naming what has never been named, allowing yourself to mourn what could not be mourned. It is necessary to break the vibrational silence that perpetuates these invisible pacts. And this begins when you recognize, this pain is not mine, but I carry it. The soul doesn't want to rid itself of these wounds through contempt. It wants to honor them, embrace them, integrate them, because only love dissolves pain, only awareness frees repetition, and only the courage to look with compassion can transform inherited scarcity into conscious flow. Perhaps now you're beginning to realize that you're not weak, you're not unlucky, you're not blocked by lack of effort. You simply carry stories that aren't yours, but are waiting to be transmuted through you. And this isn't a burden, it's a mission. You're not here just to achieve abundance. You're here to lease the paths she travels within her lineage, so that those who came before and those who will come after can breathe easier. So that your yes is not just yours, but a collective yes, echoing across the field like a blessing finally released. Have you ever noticed how some people refuse gifts? How they look away when faced with a compliment, or insist on paying for everything, even when they don't have to? This isn't just modesty. In many cases, it's a clear sign that the soul has made a pact with scarcity, a silent agreement, often inherited, that says, receiving is dangerous. And so even wanting more, the person sabotages themselves to have less. Scarcity, when experienced long enough, becomes a familiar haven. It generates pain, yes, but also familiarity. The soul learns to adapt to the little, and over time begins to build an identity around it. It creates narratives like, "I don't need much to be happy," "better simple than disappointed," or "rich people are selfish." Ooh, these phrases, repeated like disguised mantras, are merely unconscious strategies to make the pain bearable. And this is where the paradox arises. Those who live with little often develop admirable strength. They learn to be creative, resilient, and generous even in times of scarcity. But this same strength can become an emotional prison, Because when life finally offers more opportunities, more resources, more freedom, the soul hesitates. It doesn't know if it can trust, and often it refuses. Carl Jung said that what we resist persists, and scarcity, when left unchallenged, becomes a shadow that begins to filter reality. Everything grand, beautiful, and expansive begins to seem exaggerated, unfair, and threatening. Not because it actually is, but because the soul is still accustomed to it at least. It feels out of place in the face of more. This conditioning infiltrates every area of life. People become accustomed to mediocre relationships, suffocating jobs, and unnutritious environments. And the scariest part, they begin to defend these environments. They justify the pain, protect the limitations, and criticize those who dare to dream bigger. Not out of malice, but because abundance began to represent the abandonment of what had sustained it until now. Deep down, there's an ancestral fear of betraying one's origins, of appearing ungrateful to those who struggled with so little, of being rejected for rising too high. And so, many prefer to remain in the almost happy, almost fulfilled, almost abundant. Because in the almost, there's still a connection to collective pain. There's still a sense of belonging, but this loyalty, though noble, needs to be revised. The awakening soul understands that honoring ancestors is not repeating their sufferings, but releasing the stories that trapped them. And this only happens when we have the courage to desire more. Not out of greed, but out of mission. Because abundance is not just a luxury, it is a natural state of flow, of life in motion, of energy circulating. Scarcity, however well known, comes at a high cost. It makes us forget who we are. It limits us to survival, while our soul cries out for creation, expansion, and giving. And it's not about hoarding, but about having enough to overflow. Because only those with a free heart and an open field can truly transform the world around them. Allowing yourself to thrive is a spiritual act. It's saying yes to life in its fullness. It's breaking the pact with less and accepting the invitation of more love, more peace, more freedom, more expression. And this yes isn't just for you. It's for all those who came before and couldn't. It's for all who will come after and learn from your example. Maybe now you realize that scarcity was never your destiny. It was just the starting point, and it's okay to have started there. But you don't have to end up like this, because your soul knows, it always knew, that it was born for more. Money has never been just a means of exchange. For the soul, it is a symbol, a mirror. It reflects not only our beliefs about value, but also the wounds we carry about power, worth, and security. This is why many people feel uncomfortable in the face of abundance. Not because money is a problem in itself, but because deep down, it triggers unconscious memories that do not belong only to this life. Imagine a child growing up in a home where money was a source of arguments, where every penny came with tension, where prosperity meant distancing oneself from others, isolating oneself. Now imagine this child as an adult, trying to thrive, trying to start a business, attract clients, maintain a routine of abundance. But deep inside, something shuts down, something withdraws. Because for the unconscious, having money is risking love, connection, and belonging. The soul doesn't want to be the exception in the family. It wants to be accepted. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow is everything the ego doesn't recognize as its own, but which influences our behavior. And when it comes to money, the shadow can be immense. It disguises itself as humility, spirituality, and detachment. But deep down, what really exists is fear. Fear of becoming someone different. Fear of being judged. Fear of repeating old traumas, whether experienced or inherited. Many empaths, healers, and spiritual seekers have a conflicted relationship with money precisely for this reason. They associate wealth with ego, corruption, and a loss of purity. They forget that money itself is neutral. It only amplifies what already exists. A conscious heart with resources can heal generations. A spirit aligned with prosperity can sustain transformative works. But while the soul carries this distorted image of money as something dirty, cold, dangerous, it repels it. And this movement is subtle. The person forgets to send proposals, avoids pricing their work, feels guilty about charging. All this without realizing that deep down they are trying to protect themselves from an evil that may no longer exist, or that never existed but has been learned. There's also a collective pain associated with money. Exploited peoples, impoverished lineages, stories of injustice. The soul carries records of these experiences. And sometimes thriving seems to betray these memories, as if by succeeding we're abandoning our own. And so, many remain trapped in the little, not out of incapacity, but out of invisible fidelity to an ancient pain. To break this cycle, we need to rewrite the meaning of money within ourselves. It doesn't have to be a burden. It doesn't have to come with guilt or separation. It can be an extension of love, a way to expand your voice, your service, your healing. But this requires courage. The courage to look at the shadow and say, I see you, but I choose differently. True spirituality doesn't require poverty. It requires presence. And presence means recognizing where we're still trapped in stories that are no longer ours. When you start seeing money as a bridge, not a prison, everything changes. The soul opens, energy flows, and abundance begins to manifest itself lightly, naturally, organically. Maybe your fear of wealth isn't really yours. Maybe it belongs to someone you loved and lost, to someone who suffered from having too much, to an ancestral memory that taught you that growing up was dangerous, but you're no longer there. This is another life, another time. And now, you can choose what this energy will represent in your journey. Money has no morals. You are the one who gives it meaning. And when its meaning is love, contribution, expansion, there is no longer any reason to fear it. The only thing left is to allow it. Sometimes the soul isn't afraid to grow. It's afraid to grow up alone, because in the deep silence of many stories, thriving feels like an act of desertion. As if by breaking with scarcity, we were abandoning our loved ones, leaving behind those we love. And this fear is more common than you might think. Carl Jung called this inner movement in which we remain attached to patterns that hurt us, just so as not to break invisible emotional bonds. It's as if unconsciously we were saying to someone from the past, if you couldn't have it, I won't either. And so, without realizing it, the soul sabotages itself to continue belonging. This loyalty isn't born of ego, it's born of love, an ancient, deep, often ancestral love, a love that seeks to heal the past by remaining in it. The problem is that this kind of healing only perpetuates the pain, because it doesn't liberate, it imprisons. And that's why so many spiritual people, empaths, healers, and seekers fail to thrive, even with talent, preparation, and merit. Abundance becomes associated with loneliness, with rejection, with the risk of being criticized, excluded, and misunderstood. In families marked by scarcity, those who begin to grow are often seen as stuck up, ungrateful, or selfish. Not because they actually are, but because their change confronts wounds that others have not yet managed to heal. And for many, it's easier to attack what causes pain than to embrace the possibility of transformation. This dynamic creates a silent dilemma. On one side, the soul's call for expansion, for purpose, for prosperity. On the other, the fear of straying, of losing belonging, of breaking with those who have been the foundation in pain. And this is how self-abandonment disguised as humility is born, self-sabotage disguised as loyalty. But the truth is that growing up is not betraying. Growing up is paving the way. It's showing that there is another possibility, that it is possible to honor the pain of the past without reproducing it, that it is possible to love your loved ones without carrying the same burdens, that it is possible to be the first generation to flourish, without guilt. Often, your soul has been chosen to be the turning point in the family story, the one who breaks the cycle, who transforms pain into awareness, who takes everything that has been fragmented and begins to stitch it together with love. And this isn't arrogance, it's a mission. It's the courage to do things differently, even if it hurts, even if it feels lonely at first. And the most beautiful thing is that when you thrive with awareness, you don't distance yourself from your loved ones. You elevate them. Your light is uncomfortable at first, but then it illuminates. Your courage challenges, but then it inspires. Your success heals, even if many can't admit it, because when a soul awakens, it ignites the field of the entire lineage. True loyalty isn't about repeating, it's about liberating. It's about showing that it's possible to go further, that it's possible to honor history and still create a new one, that it's possible to carry in your heart those who came before, not as shackles but as roots. Prosperity doesn't break bonds. It reveals which bonds are real, which survive your freedom, which hold up even when you shine, and those that are true love will remain, maybe after a while, maybe with silence in between, but they will remain, because true love doesn't demand sacrifice, it celebrates expansion. And if someone, somewhere in your history couldn't have it, it doesn't mean you have to repeat it. You can be living proof that it's possible. You can be the link that transforms pain into dignity, effort into legacy, survival into a full life. And this is a path only the brave travel, but once you've walked it, it liberates. You say you want to prosper. You firmly affirm that you want to break free from scarcity, change your life, live to the fullest. But when the opportunity presents itself, something inside you hesitates. You postpone, you forget, you make excuses, and the worst part, believe in them. This is the most subtle and destructive trap of self-sabotage. It disguises itself as logic, as prudence, as this isn't the time. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious governs our choices long before reason manifests. And if within your unconscious there's a wound that associates money with danger, success with rejection, or abundance with guilt, your body will obey this programming. It will freeze, become ill, resist. It will do everything to protect you from something that, in its deep and silent vision, seems threatening. That's why many people feel exhausted when trying to thrive. It's not because they lack ability, talent, or effort. It's because there's invisible energy leak, a part of the soul that, while desiring growth, fears what comes with it. It fears losing its identity, its connections, the security of being where it's always been, and so every attempt at change becomes an inner war. The body feels it. It feels it when money approaches and the nervous system goes on alert. It feels it when you're about to make a sale, a proposal, a request for merit, and something tightens in your chest, your throat, your stomach. This isn't a lack of faith. It's a conflict between what the soul desires and what it has learned to fear. The cruelest thing about self-sabotage is that it acts as if it were part of you. It wears your voice. It whispers justifications with the tone of your thoughts. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice a pattern. Every time you're close to breaking a limit, something happens. A crisis, a distraction, an emotional relapse, and once again, you're back where you were, to the familiar, to what hurts but is familiar. This cycle can last decades, and many die without realizing it wasn't bad luck, it wasn't destiny, it wasn't spiritual punishment. It was just unconscious programming running deep within the system, an ancient command saying, stay small, it's safer. Don't go beyond that limit. Standing out is dangerous. Charging yourself for your gift is wrong. How many of these voices have you heard within yourself? Self-sabotage is often the soul's desperate attempt to protect a wounded child, the one who once felt rejected for shining too brightly, the one who was punished for dreaming big, the one who had to hide to survive. But now you're no longer that child. You have tools, awareness, choices, and your body needs to know this. Healing begins when you observe without judgment. When instead of beating yourself up for procrastinating, you ask, what am I trying to avoid? What fear is hiding here? What is this part of me trying to protect me from experiencing? And in that compassionate listening, the soul begins to feel safe to change the script. When you reprogram your energy, not just with affirmations but with compassion, presence and truth, your body responds, your mind clears, intuition guides, action flows, and ultimately, reality shifts. Because there's no point in wishing with your mouth if your body still carries fear in its bones. Your body is an oracle. It reveals where your soul is still trapped. And when you listen deeply, without haste, without condemnation, it shows you the path to liberation. Thriving is, above all, a process of internal reconciliation. It's aligning desire, soul, and body so that they all walk in the same direction, your highest truth. And if something in you still resists today, don't blame yourself. Just acknowledge, I was programmed to survive, but now I choose to live. For centuries, we've been taught that humility is a virtue, and indeed it is. But distorted spirituality has turned this virtue into a silent prison. It has created an archetype of the spiritual being as someone who must renounce everything, including comfort, beauty, and money. And anyone who dares to want more is branded as greedy, impure, and corrupt. And so, without realizing it, many who seek light began to shrink into the shadows. The problem isn't humility, it's the confusion between humility and self-denial. Carl Jung already warned, all light that is not integrated creates shadow. And in the spiritual realm, the shadow appears when you repress your legitimate desire to grow, to prosper, to express. Not out of vanity, but because your soul wants to serve better, achieve more, live with dignity and abundance. But this impulse is restrained, held back by unconscious memories, ancient phrases, doctrines that planted the fear of excess. You may have inherited beliefs like, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, or the meek shall inherit the earth. Messages that speak of a state of mind, but which were interpreted as orders for a materially limited life. And from this distortion, many luminous souls began to sabotage themselves. They turn down good opportunities. They even give away what they don't have. They feel guilty about charging for their work, and they live with a feeling that money and spirituality don't mix. But what if just the opposite is true? What if prosperity is a natural consequence of an aligned soul? What if money, far from being dirty, is an amplifier of your mission, not as an end, but as a healthy flow of energy that passes through you, to serve more, heal more, transform more? The problem was never money. It was the fear of being misunderstood, of being excluded from the spiritual group, of betraying some internal authority figure. How many healers, therapists, spiritual artists live on the edge for fear of appearing selfish if they charge a fair price? How many avoid growing because they associate visibility with judgment? And how many still carry the ancestral vow of poverty taken by their ancestors as a form of redemption, sacrifice, or penance? When spirituality becomes a hiding place for abundance, it ceases to be expansion and becomes contraction. And the universe, which responds to your actual frequency, not your speech, understands that you are not ready to receive, not for punishment, but for vibrational coherence. You are saying no even when you pray for yes. True humility is not scarcity. It's knowing that abundance is not just yours. It passes through you, fills you, and then spreads. Spiritual abundance says, I receive because I know my light will be stronger with resources. It says, I allow myself because the world needs the most fulfilled version of me. Unlocking this spiritual shadow is an act of courage. It is looking at the distortion with compassion and saying, now I understand. Now I can remain humble without sacrificing my right to flourish. Because a soul that frees itself from the guilt of prospering lights the way for others. And that is service. This is spirituality incarnate. There comes a point in your journey when you stop fighting scarcity and start talking to it. Instead of seeing it as a curse, you begin to see it as a messenger, a part of your soul that screams, "There's still something inside here begging to be seen." This is the beginning of true prosperity, not as an external achievement, but as an internal liberation. Thriving isn't about having more. It's about becoming more whole. All your life, you may have thought the problem was out there, in the doors that didn't open, in the resources that didn't come, in the roadblocks that seemed to always recur. But now, after everything you've heard, perhaps you're beginning to realize the key was never in the world. It was in your unconscious, in the most sacred and forgotten place of your being, where the wounds of the soul reside, the silent pacts, the inherited beliefs that silently govern your reality. Carl Jung said that what you don't become aware of becomes your destiny. And that's exactly what happens with scarcity. Until you illuminate the source of your fear of thriving, you'll continue to attract situations that reinforce that frequency. You'll continue to turn down opportunities that seemed like answers to your prayers. You'll continue to think you're protecting yourself when in fact you're shrinking. But the soul knows. It senses when the time has come to break. And if you're here, it's because that time has come. It's no longer about forcing affirmations or working yourself to exhaustion. It's about silence and listening. What old promises still bind you? What truths have you inherited without question? What versions of yourself are you keeping alive only out of unconscious loyalty? When you begin to embrace these parts, the child who was afraid, the ancestor who suffered, the soul who carried pain, something begins to shift. Stagnant energy begins to circulate. The body relaxes, the heart opens, and the money, which once seemed to run away from you, now finds its way. Because it's not just coming to pay your bills, it's coming to fulfill your mission, to sustain your expansion, to honor your path. This is the prosperity that springs from the soul, silent, firm, inevitable. It doesn't shout, it emanates, it doesn't need to prove anything. It simply expresses itself because it's aligned with who you are, with what you came to do, with the purpose that only you can fulfill. And when you enter this state, everything around you begins to fall into place. The right people appear, ideas flow, paths are laid out, not because the world has changed, but because you has changed. And now, you're no longer asking for prosperity from the outside in. You're allowing it to arise from within. It's always been there. It's just been waiting for you to feel worthy of receiving it. And believe me, you are. Not because of what you do, not because of how much you sacrifice, but simply because you exist. Life didn't create you to suffer, beg, or hide. Life created you to flourish. And when you embrace this truth, without guilt, without fear, without shame, the entire universe responds. So look within now, take a deep breath, and say to yourself, with the steady, loving voice your soul has waited so long to hear, I release myself. I allow myself, I receive, because prosperity is my original nature. Ultimately, true abundance isn't something you achieve, it's something you allow. It doesn't come because you finally become good enough. It reveals itself when you stop sabotaging yourself, when you dissolve the fear of shining, when you accept that you can be light, without extinguishing yourself out of loyalty to old pains. Today, perhaps you felt something awaken. Perhaps you have seen the origin of a blockage that has been silently accompanying you for years. A feeling that no matter how hard you tried, something was stopping you from moving forward. This something is not a curse, nor a divine punishment. It's just a part of you that was trapped in time and is now starting to break free. Throughout this journey, you've seen that the fear of thriving has deep roots in childhood, in ancestors, in spiritual vows, in distorted interpretations of what it means to be worthy of abundance. But he also saw that all these roots can be pulled out with love, awareness, and courage. Because when the soul understands that it can grow without guilt, everything flourishes. You stop chasing money, and money starts chasing you. Not because it became an easy game, but because now your frequency is clean, stable, open. And that's why, if this message touched you in any way, I invite you to leave a comment with what struck you most. Sometimes when you write, you let go. And by sharing, you heal something in another being. This space exists for this, to welcome your truth, your pain, your turning point. If you feel you are part of this journey of liberation, subscribe to the channel here, because there's so much more content that will deepen this path, and each video is like a new key to the invisible locks your soul still carries. And if you know someone who lives trapped in this subtle fear of thriving, send them this video. You can be the turning point in someone's journey. Here, your story matters. Here, pain is not shame, it is a gateway. And here, abundance is not a privilege, it is a spiritual destiny. Life wants to see you blossom, and your soul has always known this.